Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms, firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment, like and share the program, and tell your friends this is the place to be. Also, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, and remember, in both cases, hit the notification button so that, well, you can get alerted as soon as we go live. Also, want to let you guys know, remember to go to fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. It's summertime, so there's all sorts of cool new t-shirts that we have there. It's a great place to find Pro 2A swag. Know that every dollar that you spend there is going to go right back into the fight for a right to keep and bear arms, so you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. That's fpcgear.com. We talk a lot about this being a fight for civil rights, right? And we know that, those who support gun grabbers and those who support them tend to believe that civil rights are this thing where it's like special rights for special people. Meaning if you are the right ethnicity, the right gender, the right religion, the right gender identity, the right sexual preference, well then guess what? You deserve special protection and special rights under the law, or at least that's what they want you to believe. If you're a favored group, then you deserve special rights. Well, we don't happen to believe that. We believe that rights are the fundamental rights that are enumerated in our Constitution, that are for all of us, every single one of us, right? And when I say enumerated, I don't mean that these are rights that are given to us by government. These are rights that actually are fundamental human rights that are enumerated in the Constitution in order to clarify that, look, we recognize these things as human rights. But what we've started to see is because we have a Second Amendment, it's a little hard for them to get past this whole thou shalt not infringe thing. We've started to see government start to whittle away at those rights or ration those rights in a way in which we wouldn't allow them to do any other civil right. I'll give you some examples of both ways they've done it and ways they're looking to expand, and ways in which they're looking to expand that. One example of that has to do with magazine capacity laws, or laws that restrict the size of magazines. And here I'll give you an example. So here you have a list of states right now that already have limits on the number of rounds a magazine can hold in a firearm. You have California, Maryland, Connecticut, Hawaii, Massachusetts, New York, District of Columbia, New Jersey, Colorado, and you actually have seen some local municipalities in the state of Chicago have actually introduced magazine capacity bans. But I believe those are well, there are legal challenges to those. But anyway, but moving right along, and then you've also got other states who want to propose additional bans. You've got 3 federal bills that are out there right now that will get rid of magazines, or will make it illegal to own or possess magazines of more than 10 rounds. You have Kentucky. Kentucky has actually introduced a bill. Wow. Okay. You've got Oregon. Oregon has introduced a bill that when the West Coast wall of gun control. Virginia. We all know that the governor of Virginia just called, the Democratic governor of Virginia, it's called a special session in order to try and, amongst other things, ban standard capacity magazines. You've got Vermont. And then you've got 2 bills in the state of Washington. Once again, and these are all states that in the past have not been bad on guns. Once again, in the past, that's not to say that they aren't currently. Now, mind you that there is no link between the number of rounds a magazine can hold and whether or not it's likely to be used in a mass shooting. In fact, most mass shootings are not done with the evil, centerfire rifle. It's actually most of them are done with handguns. Standard handguns generally have anywhere between 7-round magazine capacity standard up to 7 to 17. I think if you get an extended magazine, you can get up to 20 something. But whenever they start talking about these magazine bans, they're always talking about these 100-round drums, which I'm like, okay, how many of those have been used in crimes? Have been used in gun violence? I never gotten an answer to that question, but they could be. So therefore, we need to ban them, right? Now, mind you, once again, let's talk about what if they started restricting the number of pages that you could read in a book every day, or the number of times you could contact or email your legislator. What if they started putting restrictions on stuff like that? The amount of time that you could watch the news, the number of movies that you could watch a day. What if they started doing that? Right? Starting to, once again, magazine capacity size has absolutely nothing to do with reducing the number of deaths from guns, but yet and still, that's exactly what it is that they're proposing to do. So let's move on to the next one. Oh, you guys know about this one. Banning the evil assault weapon. Okay, yeah, we know it's not an assault weapon. It is a semi-automatic rifle ban. Now, in most cases, it's a center fire semi-automatic rifle. Right now, you have proposed bills in states like, you have, at least one federal bill. You have 2 bills in Indiana that have been introduced. You've got Kentucky, once again, another state where you wouldn't expect something like this. Oregon, once again, building that West Coast wall of gun control. Oh, went a little bit too far. Now, mind you, that such a ban is already in place in other states like the state of California, where they have gone even further and they've banned these firearms with detachable magazines. Well, yes, they banned them with detachable magazines unless they meet certain requirements. I mean, it is outrageous, the ways in which they're going to try and ban these. Now, mind you, these are firearms that are used, long guns in general, long guns as a whole, are used in less than 3% of all gun crimes. Semi-automatic rifles are an even smaller subset of that. These aren't even, as they like to say, the AR-15 has become is the weapon of choice in mass shootings. Well, guess what? They're used in less than 8% of all mass shootings. So they're not the firearms that are being used in these crimes. But guess what? They are scary black guns, and they are military style because they're semi-automatic, fully semi-automatic. Now, let's forget the fact that there's a difference between automatic and semi-automatic, but they don't want to talk about that. They won't tell you about that because they don't know about that. To them, it looks the same, so therefore it is the same, and therefore they can't be held responsible for the truth. All right, moving right along. Now, this is an insidious one. Now, you guys have probably never heard of the what is an approved handgun roster. Now, an approved handgun roster, we have one here in the state of California, which basically says, well, a firearm has to be on this list in order for you to be able to buy it from an FFL. Now, originally when it started, it wasn't that bad. It was like, okay, well, you know what? This is more kind of consumer protection. We want to get these, well, and their goal was to get rid of inexpensive guns. But they were saying these cheap guns that are dangerous, and they're saying they're dangerous because they have no idea, they don't know what these guns are. They know nothing about them, but they just believe that if they're inexpensive, they must be dangerous. So we're going to institute certain tests, including a drop test. And if it passes these tests, what you'll do is the manufacturer will submit the firearm along with a fee. And then if it passes the test, then boom, it'll get added onto the not unsafe handgun roster, which they call it not unsafe because, well, we would never dare call a firearm safe in the state of California. Anyway, but then later, about 4 or 5 years later, they actually then included features requirements, loaded chamber indicator, as well as a lock magazine release, which basically the magazine release basically would make it so that if the magazine were ejected from the firearm, then even if there was a round in the chamber, it couldn't go off. The loaded chamber indicator would also notify you if there was a round still in the chamber. Now, couple of problems with that. And by the way, these are once again for semi-automatic handguns. Couple of problems. Number one, with the magazine release, the problem is this: is that if your assailant or if someone is attacking you and they're able to get close to you, get up on you, and they're able to somehow get the magazine out of your firearm, that one round that's left in the chamber could be the difference between you living or dying. It could. So rather than requiring people to be safe when their firearm, when the magazine is out and actually doing what they're supposed to, which is open the slide, look in the chamber, make sure there's not a round in the chamber. Instead of doing that, they want to have this so that there's no way it can be fired, so that one round that would normally be in the chamber, well, that round no longer counts when it comes to potentially saving your life. Now, the loaded chamber indicator deals with kind of the same issue, only from a different perspective. So now the magazine is out. The loaded chamber indicator will tell you if they're still around in the chamber, but it takes away an individual. It discourages individuals from doing what it is that we're taught to do, which is after you eject the magazine, you open the slide, you pull the slide back, you rack the slide back, and then you open it up and you look and you make sure that there's not a round in there. You stick your finger in there and all of that. Right? Why? Because supposedly there is a gadget that will tell you whether or not there is a round in there. But what happens if you read it incorrectly? Or what happens if the gadget doesn't work? You know, the best example I can always think of this is spell check. How many of you have written something and then gone and done spell check and thought it was all good, and then realized that there was spelled wrong? It was one of the three wrong theres. Or instead of we're, you put were because you forgot because you forgot an apostrophe, right? I mean, gadgets fail. And when gadgets fail, people are put in danger when it comes to firearms when their gadgets fail, right? And that's a major problem. That's an issue. That's why you look at things like one of the things they want to add to the roster in California is they want to require smart gun technology for firearms to be sold in the state of California. Now let's put electronic gadgetry that has already been proven that the minor league hackers can circumvent or can mess with and make sure that it doesn't function. So if it doesn't function, once again, this is a gadget that if it doesn't function, if it doesn't work, well then guess what? Your life is in danger, because the time in which you're going to be using this firearm is when it really needs to work there is no room for failure. Not like that. Not from some electronic gadget. Anyway, but one of the things they haven't instituted the smart gun requirement yet. It has been proposed and it has been shot down in the state of California, but they're likely to introduce it again. But what they have introduced, and what is currently the law, is micro-stamping in the state of California. This is where the firing pin marks the shell casing on a semi-automatic handgun, so that when the spent casing is ejected, that there's evidence saying who committed the crime. Now, there's a couple of fundamental problems with this. Number one being that it can be easily manipulated because it takes about 5 minutes and a fingernail file, or just swapping out the firing pin in order to remove that information. But also, we also need to keep in mind that 96% of all the firearms that are retrieved at a crime scene were not in the possession of their owner, meaning their owner didn't use the firearm, meaning they were obtained illegally. So if they were obtained illegally, then does it really matter who the gun belongs to? Because you're not going to find the person who did it. But the worst part of all of this was that they required it in two places. So it needed to mark the shell casing in two places. The problem is that technology does not exist. No one does it. There's no way for it to be done. Now, in the original bill, it was required by the AG, in this case Kamala Harris, to certify that the technology existed. Well, microstamping technology, yes, it did exist. But what didn't exist was the ability to do it twice. And it still doesn't happen. No one does it. And so what you've got is you've got a ban on new semi-automatic handguns here in the state of California. And that's what you see right there. If you look all the way up to 2013, those are a list of all the firearms that were on the not unsafe handgun roster. And there, after 2013, you start to see a drop-off in the number of firearms that are there and that are available. Now, California is not the only state that has one of these rosters. All right, you have California, you also have Maryland. Now, Maryland does not have any requirements like the microstamping requirement, but you do have the state of New York is does have a bill right now where they're looking to introduce the micro-stamping requirement. Now, if you have a requirement that doesn't exist, that no one meets, no one can meet, doesn't that in fact equal a ban? In this case, on new model semi-automatic handguns, especially when with the ones that are already on the roster that are grandfathered in, when if they change a supplier of anything, if they change a spring, if they change anything, it's now considered a new model handgun and has to have everything that is required to be on the roster, including micro-stamping. That is a ban. And folks, let's just be real. That's what rationing of civil rights is. When they start to ration civil rights, their goal is not to give you more civil rights later. Their goal is to take those rights away. Their goal is hoping that you'll get used to having less. When they start to limit your speech, their goal is to make sure that you'll be used to less and less free speech. So that eventually when they make free speech, when they say you no longer have a right to free speech, you won't fight it. Things like privacy and government surveillance, we're okay with it. The more and more we become okay with it, the more and more we sign away our right to privacy, the more they look to say, the more in which they look to infringe upon that right. Private property rights. The more we allow government to tell us what to do with our property and how we can handle our own property, the more they're going to take. Because the government is all about control, and eventually they're going to want more and more control of our rights. But they're not going to do it with everybody, because they're still the special people and their special rights. They're still going to make sure that they have their civil rights. But you and I, we're not so special in their eyes, particularly because we don't wish to give up our rights, because we don't wish to give control of our rights over to them. Now, I get it. There's a balance between liberty and security. But I happen to believe that any measure of security that requires you to give up your liberty will eventually cause you to lose both, because it is a slippery slope. And I happen to believe, in particular, when it comes to gun rights, I happen to believe that the slippery slope logic applies. And that once they take one thing, they're going to come back for more. Folks, that's why we're here. That's why FPC is here, to fight to make sure that they aren't able to take away those fundamental rights that are not just enumerated in our Constitution, but they're fundamental human rights that are protected by our Constitution. Anyway, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I appreciate you liking and sharing this program and telling your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.